I love biopics. The Wolf of Wall Street, Goodfellas, Schindler's List, Catch Me If You Can, The Social Network, and Ed Wood are some of my favorite movies ever made. The figures in question, whether they are good or bad or weird, are interesting and make their films compelling to watch. I don't think there's a better exploration of greed and excess than The Wolf of Wall Street, or a better look at the horrors of the Holocaust than Schindler's List. The thing that all of these movies have in common is that they take liberties with their subject matter. Merely recounting a person's life, no matter how intriguing that person is, makes for a bland experience. With these films, filmmakers are trying to convey the importance of these people and what made them interesting, so characters and events are added, altered, and changed to achieve this goal. Despite the changes, these stories are close enough to history to earn their title of a true story. Hamilton may be the most popular piece of historical fiction to come out in the last 20 years. It follows the story of Alexander Hamilton, an American founding father, the first Treasury Secretary, and the creator of America's financial system. And while this video will seem overwhelmingly negative, I must stress that the musical has earned its place in pop culture. It's an excellent musical. Alexander Hamilton is such an interesting character, and his arc as he falls from Revolutionary War hero to a self-destructive narcissist is so well written. The way that Miranda assigns each character a musical motif that both describes the character and changes as the character evolves is brilliant. All the performances are great, especially Miranda with his relentless and captivating energy. Musicals don't often burst into the mainstream the way Hamilton did, and it's a testament to the musical's quality that it managed to capture the hearts and minds of not just theater people or Americans, but the world. I'm saying these things because I don't want to sound mean-spirited when I say Hamilton is flawed and problematic. Due to Miranda's personal investment in Alexander Hamilton, the musical puts the man on a pedestal as an unsung hero of American history. The problem with Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton is that it romanticizes genuinely terrible people by stripping them of their historical context and altering their history to allow these people to appear fun, likable, and inspirational. Both the musical and the massive changes used to form its narrative call into question authorship and the responsibilities that it entails. Part 1. History and Hamilton. I think it's important to discuss the differences between the way Alexander Hamilton and the Founding Fathers really were versus how they are presented in the musical. I must make it clear now that I'm not attacking any of the show's creative choices, as I really like those. I know Hamilton did not rap, but I love the inclusion of it. Hamilton is presented as an intelligent and ambitious person, so him rapping lyrics at fast speeds with lots of rhymes works. It makes it seem like he's so eager to share his ideas and opinions that they just spill out of him. The rap lyrics also makes exposition seamless. Miranda has the monumental task of filling the audience in on a lot of history that they don't know, and he found a way to do it in an engaging and interesting way. It's also important to mention the show's casting of people of color in the roles of the Founding Fathers, as it is another of Miranda's positive creative changes. It's the past of America told by the people who make up present America, which helps put a spotlight on important groups that are not usually shown in media that takes place during colonial America. This casting allows for all Americans to see themselves in the history of their country. The casting did make great strides to give people of color more representation on Broadway and in theater, and that's commendable. While diversity shouldn't need an explicit point to warrant its conclusion, it's essential to point out Miranda's goal behind his casting choices in order to understand the changes. There are also a lot of inaccuracies that are simply inconsequential. The Schuyler sisters had several brothers, Hamilton never really punched the Princeton bursar, and he also wasn't a womanizer. They also left out the fact that after the duel where Aaron Burr killed Alexander Hamilton, Aaron Burr married Eliza Jumel, the wealthiest woman in America at the time. Jumel later divorced Burr because of his affairs and because he was squandering her money. She then proceeded to hire Alexander Hamilton Jr. as her divorce lawyer. Miranda had the difficult task of fitting 30 years of history into 3 hours, so events were swapped around, minor characters weren't included, and motivations were changed. The issue comes with some of the major decisions that Miranda made. Sadly, history isn't always these fun divorce settlement stories. It can be painful too, as often people of the past had disgusting views and performed horrible actions that hurt a lot of people. Hamilton presents a comfortable view of history as Miranda romanticizes leaders of America's past, and no leader is more romanticized in the musical than the titular Hamilton. The musical's Alexander Hamilton is portrayed as a pretty good person. Setting aside the affair he had, Miranda shows Hamilton to be a caring person, whose ambition and talent is used to do great things, like fight against slavery, help struggling immigrants, and protect democracy. He's shown as a very progressive guy for his time. Hamilton, especially in the first half of the musical, shows an optimistic view of the American dream. He's an immigrant who rises out of poverty and into prominence to become one of America's founders due to the power of his words. Hamilton's ability to write is one of the only similarities between the real and fictional person. In the musical, Hamilton's status as an immigrant is a major part of his character, even though Hamilton wasn't an immigrant. He moved from one British colony to another, which would be the modern equivalent of moving from New York to California. No one looked down on Hamilton from stemming from another colony, but Hamilton certainly looked down on others from stemming from other countries. The real Hamilton despised immigrants. He supported making it harder for immigrants to gain citizenship, and supported giving the president the ability to deport immigrants without cause. He was also part of a very anti-immigrant coalition of the Federalist Party, and truly believed that immigrants would corrupt the nation. He certainly wasn't a champion of the people and the disadvantaged. Out of a distrust for democracy and a desire to maintain power, Hamilton proposed an elective monarchy, where presidents and senators serve for life. That 6-hour constitutional convention speech mentioned in the musical was not a passionate defense for democracy, but an appeal from a monarchist. Hamilton is closer to an elitist than the populist that he's portrayed as in the musical. But at least Hamilton is anti-slavery, right? It's one of his main goals in the musical. He and Lawrence write essays against slavery.
I stay at work with Hamilton, we write essays against slavery.
He agrees with Lawrence's hatred of slavery and supports the 1st Black Battalion.
But we'll never be truly free until those in bondage have the same rights as you and me. You and I do or die. Wait till I sally in on a stallion with the 1st Black Battalion.
We're told how if not for his early death, he would have done so much more to end slavery.
I speak out against slavery. You could have done so much more if you only had time.
And he identifies as a revolutionary manumission abolitionist.
Squad and conventional wisdom, like it or not, a bunch of revolutionary manumission abolitionists.
But unlike what Miranda would have you believe, manumission and abolition are not synonyms. Manumission takes place when owners free their slaves voluntarily. When a government outlaws and ends slavery completely, the process is known as abolition. While Hamilton may have been a manumissionist early in life, he was never an abolitionist. Alexander Hamilton's involvement in slavery is essential to his personal and professional identity. As a New York delegate to the 1787 Constitutional Convention, Hamilton supported the so-called 3/5 clause, which counted each enslaved worker as only 3/5 of a person. Hamilton acted as a middleman, purchasing and selling people to and for his family, friends, and legal clients. This was to be expected as Hamilton married into one of the wealthiest and most prominent families in New York, the Schuyler family, which was heavily involved in the slave trade, and owned at least 27 slaves between their Albany home and other estates. Hamilton's father-in-law, Philip Schuyler, was reportedly the largest owner of enslaved people in New York during his time. As a member of the elite, Hamilton owned slaves as well. The idea that Hamilton was an abolitionist was falsely put forward by his son, John C. Hamilton, who completed a 7-volume biography of his father in 1864. This view was challenged by John C.'s nephew and Alexander's grandson, Allan McLean Hamilton, who discovered that his grandfather's books showed he had purchased numerous slaves for himself and others. There are many other financial records that have been found since that further reveal Hamilton's past as a slave owner. In her essay, An Odious and Immoral Thing, Hamilton's Hidden History as an Enslaver, Jessie Sir Philippi examines many of these financial records, from buying a woman to aid Eliza in household duties, to the inventory of Hamilton's property made to settle his affairs after his demise, valuing servants at $400. We may never know what happened to the men, women, and children that Hamilton enslaved, but we know they existed. While Hamilton may have been a supporter of manumission as a youth, any anti-slavery sentiments he once held dissolved as he became accepted into America's colonial elite, as he traded slaves, owned slaves, and helped create laws that maintained slavery. The entire narrative of the musical is dependent on divorcing Hamilton from historical context, as well as his problematic actions or ideas. The only way to hide Hamilton's xenophobic nature is to pretend he's an immigrant. The only way to present Hamilton as a champion of democracy is to remove his desire for America to be a monarchy. The only way to present Hamilton as an uncompromising abolitionist is to ignore the fact that he married into a prominent slave-owning family, that he owned slaves himself, and that he codified slavery. These choices add up into the Hamilton represented in the musical, and the Hamilton from reality are opposites. And in doing this, Miranda romanticizes Hamilton. Miranda, to make us root for his protagonist, scrubbed that protagonist free of crime. It's a distortion of the truth that is massive in scope. It's a piece of revisionist history that passes itself off as fact. Miranda does this for the other founding fathers of, and participants in, early America. George Washington's goodbye to the White House isn't a melancholic farewell, when you realize that Washington ordered the destruction of indigenous communities and had dentures made from the teeth of his slaves. Angelica, Eliza, and Peggy's song as they walk around a bustling New York isn't as cute when you realize that they're slave heiresses. Even Thomas Jefferson, who the audience is told is a slave owner, has a fun little moment with Sally's receptionist.
Sally, be a lamb, darling, won't you open it? It says the president's assembling a cabinet, and that I am to be the Secretary of State. Great, and that I'm already Senate approved.
This is a moment that becomes genuinely disturbing when you learn that that girl is Sally Hemings, an enslaved girl that Jefferson raped and impregnated. It's indelicate and it's careless. Miranda somehow finds a way to romanticize a relationship with the woman and the man who raped her. Miranda knows the history behind these people. Details such as knowing who Sally Hemings is and countless interviews prove it, and yet he chooses to ignore the facts. Hamilton is so far off from the truth that it appears less like historical fiction and more like a fan fiction involving the Founding Fathers. Creative license is okay, but rewriting history and passing it off as truthful isn't. Part 2. Miranda and Hamilton. In an interview with the New York Times, Miranda says, "When I encountered Alexander Hamilton, I was immediately captivated. He's an inspirational figure to me, and an aspirational one." In the musical, Miranda shows Hamilton as young, scrappy, and hungry. Lin-Manuel Miranda identifies with Alexander Hamilton. They are both writers who rose through their own abilities to stardom and prominence. Both are ambitious and gained fame through their writing. Hamilton the musical is a love letter to writers and an ode to the power of words. From the way words bring success, to the way they develop relationships, to the way they destroy them. Words can establish a legacy of a great person or a terrible one. Miranda sees himself in Hamilton, this founder of America who rode his way to the top, and romanticized and glamorized him and his legacy. Miranda in the musical presents Hamilton as an unsung hero of American history. From the opening that introduces him in a bombastic way, to the final monologue about legacy, to the final song where after Hamilton's death, every character, whether an ally or a rival to Hamilton, comes on stage and sings his praises to the audience.
President Madison.
He took our country from bankruptcy to prosperity. I hate to admit it, but he doesn't get enough credit for all the credit that he gave us.
This legacy is so important that Eliza, who sang about how she wanted out of it, decides to carry it on in her own way. While some of these characters were shown to have flaws, they were still placed on a pedestal. Miranda frequently compares them to religious figures. In My Shot, Hamilton compares himself and his fellow revolutionaries to Moses, searching for the promised land.
Foes oppose us, we take an honest stand, we roll like Moses, claiming our promised land.
And in A Winter's Ball, Hamilton is said to be at the right hand of the Father, making the comparison that Washington is God and Hamilton is Jesus Christ.
Watch this obnoxious, arrogant, loudmouth bother. Be seated at the right hand of the Father.
This glorification, alongside his underdog status, allows Hamilton to exist in the audience's mind as an important figure that is exempt from vilification. I've talked to a lot of people about this video. I've been planning it for months. Most supporters of the show that I talk to, both in person or over at r/Hamilton Musical, will be quick to point out that Hamilton is a piece of historical fiction and not a documentary, so that some liberties can be taken. And I agree. I spoke earlier about the need to interpret some events and how I enjoyed many of the creative choices that Miranda made, as I thought they added to the characters and the themes of the story. The problem with that is, the characters in historical fiction should be based on history. If you complain that the story wouldn't be as good if these people were portrayed as the elitist enslavers they are, then maybe this isn't a story worth telling. In relating to Hamilton in such a personal way, I believe Miranda began to see these people not as people, but as characters. In doing this, he could wipe away the problems that they had to make them likable and sympathetic. Hamilton could become an underdog, and the elite around him went from his friends to his enemies. Therefore, Hamilton the person, and Hamilton from the musical, are total opposites. Once Miranda saw these people as characters, their past and their personalities became malleable. Washington could become an inspirational leader, Jefferson became a dynamic and energetic rival, and the Schuyler sisters could be a charming group of girls who enjoy walking the streets of New York City. Miranda glamorizes the Founding Fathers and cleans them of the details of their past that Americans would rather not confront. Hamilton, a man who reflects many of the horrendous ideas of his time, is morphed to fit the ideas of our time. Hamilton presents a palatable version of history. It's comfortable, but incorrect. Ask anyone about Hamilton, and they will tell you about a poor immigrant who rose due to his natural talent, and not the hateful slave-owning elitist that he really was, and most of them, like Miranda, would rather hold on to that vision. Part 3. The Responsibilities of Historical Fiction. Should Miranda have any responsibility to tell the truth? No historical fiction is 100% accurate. Unless it's Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, that one's as close as you can get. If you wanted an accurate retelling of the facts, that's what a documentary or history book is for. In a dramatized biography, characters are made up to add drama, events are swapped around, details left out, but the story remains largely the same. In an Atlantic interview, Edward Dillman asked Miranda if he has any responsibility as a playwright and a storyteller when telling Hamilton's story, to which Miranda responds, "My only responsibility as a playwright and a storyteller is to give you the time of your life in the theater. I just happen to think that with Hamilton's story, sticking close to the facts that help me." It's clear from this quote, and many others, that Miranda sees himself as an entertainer and not an informer when he says he only chooses to utilize the facts that help him entertain. But I think Miranda has more responsibility than simply being an entertainer. I believe authors, when making something as rooted in history as Hamilton, should have the responsibility to make it historically accurate. Popular stories shape the perception of these people. Ask anyone about Hamilton, and their view of the man will be a positive one, largely due to Miranda's musical. Whether Miranda intended to or not, he provided a pleasing and simple narrative of the American Revolution, in which his protagonists are meant to admire without hesitation. That's the biggest question of the video. It's not whether Hamilton is historically accurate. It's whether Hamilton is a responsible piece of historical fiction. Hamilton promotes itself as an accurate retelling. Characters sing about how their stories will be told and who will tell them. There's a meta-narrative about how these people want to leave a legacy and have their story remembered. The final moment in the musical is Eliza realizing her husband's story was told and is remembered fondly by the people of the country that he helped build. But who decides whether historical figures are winners or losers, heroes or villains? What happens to those countless gray areas in history? Our words and our stories have power. It's a core theme of both the musical and this essay. Hamilton's words dragged him out of poverty and into politics and prominence. They won in battles, made him friends and enemies, grew and destroyed his relationship with Eliza, led to his death, and established a legacy. Miranda's words revived popular interest in a largely unknown historical figure, but at the cost of romanticizing a past that is better left unglorified. And since this is told by Miranda, someone who admires and relates to the protagonist, Hamilton is changed and idealized as a progressive figure in America's past. Who tells a story and how it's told determines its legacy and impact, and I don't believe that as an author, Miranda can naively ignore that.